Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Tesla Club India podcast. I have with me Priyan's experience with EV and Garvit from Tesla Club India team. Today we have a very special guest, Shreyas Gupta. He worked at Ather and now lives in Europe and owns a Tesla Model 3. So we will talk about his experience and electric market in India and about all that. So Priyan's,
Yes, welcome, Shreyas. So, why don't we start with your introduction and how did you get involved in electric vehicles? And from there, we'll pick up the conversation.
Okay. Hey everyone, and thanks so much for having me on the podcast. I'm quite excited to talk to you guys. Going with my experience, I was always interested in vehicles in general. My dad had an auto dealership from as long as I can remember, until maybe when I was in grade sixth or seventh. So we used to have like a new car at home almost every week, and I got to experience a lot of new cars coming and going to our home. And I was quite interested in becoming an automotive engineer eventually. I started researching how to get into this, and then the first thing that came up was, hey, do mechanical engineering in India, and after that, maybe do a master's from the US or Europe, and that is the kind of path to automotive engineering. So that's what I thought I'll do. Then I started studying, went to do mechanical engineering. And in college, I realized that engineering wasn't really my thing. I mean, I like building things, but I wasn't great at design. I wasn't really great at, the nitty gritties, and I couldn't spend hours and days working on solving very small problems. So I was more of an integrator than a builder, let's say. And that's when around, I think, when the Model S was launching. So I kind of saw Model S being launched, and the Model X got demoed then, and I was super hooked with Tesla since then. After that, I think what happened was I did an internship at Royal Enfield. And during my time during the internship, I realized that there were quite a lot of people doing electric vehicle conversion projects. So I thought, a electric motorcycle is a project that I could do. It is small enough that it would not really, uh, be out of hand, but also it is cheaper to do a electric motorcycle conversion instead of an electric car. So I was thinking how I can find the money to do it while I was interning there. And I asked them, hey, do you guys have any plans for building electric vehicles? And they were like, hey, that's too far away. We've not even thought about it yet. So not happening while you're here. Maybe you can do it once you go back to college. So in my third year, when I went back to the institute, I started looking around for professors who could help me fund electric vehicle project. And I found one professor who was willing to do that, but the only caveat was that we had to build an electric car and not an electric motorcycle, because there was some collaboration where the electric car was something that they wanted to build. So I said, okay, maybe we can take that up. Started building that car, got some funding, got around to maybe like the very early stage of the prototype. And that was almost 2 years, and we couldn't really finish the project. But I got to learn quite a lot. And that got me super interested into electric vehicles in general. And yeah, it was a great time trying to kind of find out parts and everything, uh, cells, importing them from China to India. This was back in 2015, so there wasn't really a market or a supply chain for that. And that is when I think someone told me about Ather and Torque Motors. So these were the two companies who were really trying to build a electric two wheeler, and that got me interested. And I said, you know what, I'll try to find out if I can work for one of these companies. That would be something interesting to do. um, Interestingly, after I got placed from campus in a consulting firm, somebody from Ather reached out to me saying that, hey, we saw your questions being answered on Quora about electric vehicles. We really like the way you put things, and we'd like to have a chat with you about a potential role. And that was amazing. So I got like super happy that, hey, Ather reached out, and I flew down to Bangalore, met the team there, met Swapnil, Ravneet, Nilay, and it was quite fun. And I got the job. So right out of college, I started working at Ather. initially my role was to basically write content. So you will find a lot of blogs from Ather from 2017, 18, which I've written for them. I was doing all the broadcast communication with the newsletters, with the owner events and such. And then I think was when they said that, hey, we want to start a community. And that is how the Ather forum, as it is today, was kind of born. And I was the one who they said that, say, hey, you know, you already know quite a lot of the potential owners. You've done some events with them, so it would be good if you take that project up. So I started building the Ather forum from then. This was, I think, back in early 2018 or mid 2018, not sure. And yeah, that's how the Ather forum started. That's what I did for about another year or so at Ather, and it was quite fun. We did a Chennai launch event where we took 50 uh, owners to the Chennai launch with their vehicles as well from Bangalore. And we had quite a lot of rides done there. And then we came back, launched the vehicle in Chennai as well, did couple more events. And after that, I started working on two more broad business level projects, which were to expand internationally and also build a vehicle that was more capable for the shared mobility market in India, because that was like really heating up at that time. So while I was doing that, things were a bit slower than I liked, and then yeah, an opportunity came up from outside. So that's when I kind of moved ships and joined Bounce. So that was how I kind of got into electric vehicles first, and then ended up being at Ather for 2.5 years.
Wow, that's an amazing journey. And if you look at it, like I mean, you literally had to build an electric vehicle to get noticed, and then had to write about EVs, and only then like someone like Ather was looking at looked at you and were like, okay, they got you in. So why don't you tell me a few things like at Ather, right? I mean, when you joined, the company must have been what, 3, 4 years old by then. You joined in 2017, right?
Yeah, when I joined, I think the company was less than 4 years old. We were less than 200 people when I joined, and we were still at the Victoria Layout office, which was a much smaller office than the one they have now. So that was quite a long time back. I think over 6 years back now.
Paint us a picture as to how how it is like how it is working in a small startup, which is a big brand name today. And you have like typical you have more than 200 people still working in this very small company. And like what would your typical day be like? And you said that you initially started out with building like writing content for them, and then slowly graduating to managing the community for them. So how, like I mean, like talk to us as to how, like would did you have freedom to try out different experiments? What kind of space were you given at the in the role? And because it was a very new product and a very new role, I'm assuming you must have had quite some freedoms about it. Like, so can you just talk to us about that?
Yeah, so I mean, since Ather was my first company, I really didn't have a benchmark to compare, saying, hey, this is what I've worked in and this is what I know, and then this is how I will compare Ather to it, right? So that was never the thing. When I walked in, Ather was the first company that I joined and started working in. It was a very small company then, and I think there were very few people in the business side of the org, maybe like 10, but most of them, I think about 150 plus people, were really hardcore into engineering and product. And that's something that I don't think a lot of companies had back then. A very strong product culture, very strong culture of making sure that the quality of the product was great, making sure that everything worked from end to end, and people had a great ownership experience. So that was really the core of Ather when I joined. And I think you can see that translating today as well. Like the vehicles from early then are still on the roads. I still own the Win 55 Ather, and it has been working well. My parents have been using it in India for the last 2 years since I've been out, and I think that was the real thing that stuck. That we don't compromise on anything. there was a funny thing that we used to say that Ather is always 6 months away from launching, because when Ather first did the Surge unveil in February 2015, 2.5 years before I joined, they said they'll be launching in 6 months. And every time you would ask someone, they would say, "Hey, we are 6 months away from launch. We're 6 months away from launch," and that number never came down. So eventually, when I joined, I was again told that, "Hey, we're planning to launch in 6 months," but there were some people who were being realistic, saying that, "Hey, we will probably launch by end of 2018." So that was some reassurance there. But what really was something that I enjoyed at Ather was everybody was extremely approachable, and everybody was very much passionate about what they were doing. So it wasn't a job to people. I mean, you could actually walk into the office at 2 a.m. and find engineers working in the labs. And that is something that is very rare. I mean, and there were people who would just spend days and nights at the company, and then they would have to be told, "Guys, go back, go home." There were people who wouldn't go home for 3 days in a row, stay at the Ather, work, eat, sleep, and then repeat, basically. So that was quite fun. And considering we owned the building there, I mean, we didn't, I don't know if we owned it, but it was like a completely private building, the one that I joined in. It was always open to employees. So you could go there anytime. I think I stayed one night because I was so excited to spend the night at the office. And there were some people in the BMS team, and I think I remember the BMS team folks were the ones who used to stay the longest and like keep tinkering on the Ather BMS that was in the battery packs. And one more thing that I really liked at that time was that Ather, while they had a very fast moving approach, they also were very clear that we will not ship something that hasn't been tested. And there was a room in which there was a charger which had been running for I don't know how many hours, but when that charger completed 10,000 hours of continuous runtime at 1 kilowatt, Tarun, sent out a mail to everyone saying that we have now tested our charger being continuously loaded for 10,000 hours, and it has not failed, and with a 1 kilowatt load. So that was quite interesting. And there were a lot of those small wins that we had. There was a time when we went through a cell revision because something happened and we realized we could deliver much better cells. There was a motor revision that happened. The product was almost built, and then we realized that, hey, we need a bigger, better, powerful motor. So the new motor was introduced with the aluminum frame. Before the aluminum frame, you'd actually see renders from 2015, which had a steel frame which was green in color, and it was tubular. So those were quite some things that were happening, which was amazing because a very small team of people were able to build things very rapidly, but ensuring that it was the highest quality ever.
Yeah, I mean, the way you're describing it, it is completely in sync with how Tarun described working at like founding Ather on the First Principles podcast by the Ken, where they were focused on making everything in-house. And yeah, I mean, I think you can see the quality, the way everything, like how Ather products are much better as compared to other two-wheeler manufacturers. So uh, thank you for that brief discussion on Ather. Nikhil, if you have any other questions, you can continue.
So it seems like a long time ago. I mean, I don't think I didn't know of Ather in back in 2018. Maybe at 2018 and or 2019, I got to know about them. I met Ravneet at 450X launch in 2020 January. I
Oh,
did,
okay.
yeah, I did interview with him and Arun. And so,
Mhm.
what do you think of the Ather's product approach that they took then and they still kind of have now, which is they are focusing on somewhat like a performance scooter market in India. And I think that's a kind of limiting thing in India, performance and scooter. Don't you think so?
So
What was the internal approach to their long-term plan?
yeah, so I'll answer that in two parts. I think one thing that I don't necessarily agree with is that Acer builds performance scooters. it was more, to me, it was more about building a no compromise product, right? Which is very different from saying that we are building a performance first vehicle. Because if you think about it, the product itself excels not just in performance but everything else as well. I mean, it's practical, it's extremely durable, it has a great range. You can actually haul a lot of stuff with it. I mean, the design brief said that the floorboard should be flat so that you can actually tow around a gas cylinder or a 20-liter can of water on it without having to try and balance it. And actually, during COVID, I have done that multiple times. So I
I'm
don't
not, I'm
necessarily
not,
agree.
I'm not questioning that. Ather is a obviously quality product, and they have focused on quality. I have often said that they didn't focus enough on expansion that they should have, but they have definitely focused on quality.
Yeah. No, so what I'm trying to say is that the product's brief was broadly to say that it is a no compromise product. And if you think about it, when you see it compared to what products were available back in 2017-18 when Ather was trying to launch, the intent was clear that unless we build something way superior than what is there in the market, and I'm not talking about electric vehicles, I'm talking about any scooter in the market at that time, which primarily was like the Jupiter or the Honda Activa, right? It had to have something that sets it apart compared to the market, right? And onboard navigation, smart connectivity, all that is fine. But until you enjoy living with the product day to day, until you enjoy taking it to work daily, you wouldn't be able to sell it as much as Ather was able to sell it. So, I mean, the way I always saw it was that the quickest way to sell an Ather was to hand over the key to somebody and say, go take it for a ride. And the moment people rode it, came back and said, I want to put a down payment because it was that much fun. So I think that's what is what Ather wanted to do, and they broke the mold by doing that. So in short term, I think that was amazing. In the long term, I am not too sure because I understand where you're coming from, right? That India is a very price sensitive market or a value sensitive market,
No, I
and
mean,
if you can sell something.
I got the initial part that they wanted to be have a foot in the market, have people experience, and have their name that there's a company like Ather that's doing such a great products. But that's
Mhm.
that cannot transition to long-term strategy for mass market. That's more feasible in India.
So that's true. And what I mean, I really don't know what Ather's strategy is today, right? I've been out of the company for over 3 4 years, almost 4 years now. So I really don't know what their long term strategy is today and what it was even 2 years ago. But what I can say from my point of view is that they kind of got it spot on when they initially launched. And in terms of long term strategy, especially given the market in India and how it evolved, like think about it this way, right? Royal Enfield is a kind of performance motorcycle, or it is bought for the aspirational value of it and not for the practical value of it, right?
Right.
And Royal Enfield went from selling a couple thousand units a month to a couple thousand units daily. And that was market creation that Royal Enfield was able to do. Now, there is an argument to be made that the scooter category in India has existed all along. And if you're trying to create a new market there, it is difficult. But when I see it now, right, there are people who I know who bought electric vehicles from 2012 all the way to 2017 from Yo Bikes and, Indus and all those kind of small players,
Right.
which were mostly like kit built or imported products.
Yeah.
They swore that they would never buy an electric vehicle because they had such a terrible experience with the quality and the performance of those products. I see them now buying Ather again because they can see how much of a different product it is, even if it costs almost 40 to 50% higher than a comparable product, petrol product. So, um, and then there is the other side of the spectrum, which is to say that people will go and buy the cheapest available alternative, which is the cheapest to buy and the cheapest to run. They will say that, hey, this is a practical vehicle for me. I don't care how much this accelerates or how fast this goes. to me, at the end of the day, what matters is the cost, and what matters is the running cost. So there are always going to be people on both sides of the spectrum. You can't build one product that fits
No,
everyone.
obviously,
But
but
if you
I'm
can,
saying that how they they recently updated their 450 series. If you have seen it, they have launched 450s. It has
yeah,
2.9 kilowatt hour battery and it is priced at 1.3 lakh. Right. So obviously the scooter
uh-huh,
has seen lots of improvement since then in various things. Uh,
yeah,
but since still price wise, it's kind of high, don't you think for the scooter market? I get that in motorcycle there can be still, people do long trips and sports and stuff. But for a company to grow to selling from few thousand to few lakh, where they have to go, they should be targeting the lower category.
so that, I mean, that is something that might be true. I don't know that, because there are companies who are trying to build like a 50,000 product or a 80,000 product or a lakh rupee product, right? That 1 lakh is a very big mental barrier that
Right.
people have to overcome. That hey, this product costs more than 1 lakh or less than 1 lakh, and I think Ather has always tried to reduce their input cost to be able to sell at the best possible price in the market. But it's also not that easy. I mean, with the current platform that they have, I don't really know if that is really possible. Because again, if you keep in mind that Ather has never really sold a compromise product. I mean, I see there are products in the market from big name brands like Ola, which are available with a starting sticker price of maybe 80,000. But if you look at it from spec to spec, they have, I think, introduced a hub motor. They have introduced something like a 2 kilowatt hour battery and so on. So I think you can always do that, and maybe Ather will in the future. I'm not sure, but I don't know if that's the right thing to do or not. That's just like I just don't have enough data to
So
say that is
did,
the right thing or the wrong thing.
uh, I'm not sure what was the factory capacity at the time. Did you ever visit the factory at that time?
I visited the factory when the Gen 1 was in production, the small factory.
Early days.
I don't know, the first one. I never visited the second and the third factory. Yeah, but I think the first factory had a capacity of maybe 25,000 a year, is what we were told, but I don't remember the exact numbers. But it was in the uh, low tens, low 10,000s per year.
Right. I mean, the scooter market has basically picked up in last couple of years. Has seen a big jump. Keeping aside the Chinese assemblers,
Yeah,
we don't
Yeah.
even we don't even
One,
include them in the comparison with anything.
yeah.
yeah,
Shreyas, I have one more question. Like in the past, like so Ather has been like a venture funded company, right? You have investors from uh, a very big name investor is like Hero, right? So what I wanted to understand was that like in the early stages, it's very natural for a company to um, almost run out of cash. And do you remember any such incidences that were happening during your time there? And if so, like what was the environment there? How were the employees feeling about it? If you can just tell us about that.
yeah. So I don't think I can go too much into that detail, honestly, considering I have been at Ather, and it's not fair for me to talk about any of these things publicly. But I'll just say this, that startups who are funded externally versus companies who are profit making and they have their own cash flow and revenue and profit to work with operate very differently. So a lot of times decisions were made based on how much money do we have or how much runway do we have. And I think Ather did that better than a lot of other companies at that time. I don't ever think there was a time where people were scared that, we'll lose our jobs or the company will shut down, because that is also, I think, a merit that Tarun and Swapnil had, that they were always sharp, always on point, and always having that long term vision. I mean, maybe when everybody thinks about long term they think about in a startup world is about 6 months to 2 years. That's long term. These
Correct.
guys always think about things with the view of 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and I think they still do. So from that point of view, if you ever got a chance to speak to them or during like being at Ather, you would never feel that they are stressed about raising money or if they are stressed about the company running out of money. Uh, Also, Ather had good investors. They had a good brand value. So if push it came to that where they really needed the money, they could have always done debt funding. So that's also something that can be done in a company which is as big as Ather. But and keep in mind, I joined Ather when they had already raised Series B, which was the hero round.
Yeah.
So it is possible that it could have happened before 2016 when they
Oh,
raised
yeah.
that round. But
Yeah.
after I joined, it wasn't really a thing. It was always about growing. It was always about expanding.
Correct. Because like manufacturing a hardware product which they are building from scratch is, as we've seen in Ather, right? It's time intensive, B2C product especially. So yeah, I mean, kudos to the early team as well as to you for bringing out this amazing product for us in the market.
Hey,
Um,
thanks. I honestly never did anything really on the product.
So
I was just there sidelines
like all of
looking
us
at it.
want was the experience, right? So
can I say that Shreyas, you were a bit of on the marketing side with having customers involved?
Yeah, I was in the marketing team. I mean, there were no two ways about it. I was a part of
Okay,
the
cool.
marketing team. I was reporting to the head of marketing, so
So,
I was clearly in the marketing.
Ather always had a good community, and the owners were always very excited to share their experience with everyone and have others butts in the seat, as you can say. Uh, so,
Mhm.
I think recently, I think it was last year, they shared something that their marketing was of 6% of the total revenue, something like that. And they sponsored some big companies in football and then in IPL. Do you think it
Mhm.
was really necessary considering the community they already had, and given that they have still very much demand, but production is kind of haven't met everything, and they still need to grow a lot. If sales wise, we now have Ola, which is basically let's saying double or triple even in some months of the Ether. What do you think of that strategy
Yeah.
from marketing and owner point of view that you experience?
Yeah. So, I mean, what you're talking about is not necessarily just marketing. It's more about advertising and sponsoring and stuff, right?
I
So,
mean,
I think
was that really
I
a needed part from Ether, or could they have done without it also, and would it have been fine?
yeah. Oh, so I think again, I really don't have a very strong opinion about it, but I also heard one of the podcasts that Tarun did. I don't remember which one, but he said something which kind of stuck with me. And he said, we are trying to sell in a market where uh, people know Dil Mein Hai Hero and Hamara Bajaj, right? And you're trying to compete with them. So the moment you say Ather and you show the product, everybody thinks it's an important product. It is going to probably shut down over time. They're bringing it from somewhere. Pata nahi company rahegi, nahi rahegi. So those kind of things are there in the market. And once they had kind of flipped the switch where they went from the early enthusiasts and the adopters and they wanted to go mass market, I think getting the brand name out was really important. And like now when you go and talk to people in small, like when I joined Ather, people told me that you're doing a career suicide by going into an electric vehicle company. There is no future for electric vehicles in India, because remember, this is back in 16 when I
Right.
first said I was going to join an electric vehicle company, right? So people didn't know about Ather and they didn't trust, and then nothing was there. But now when I go back to my home, meet my relatives, meet people in small towns, everybody knows Ather. And even until 2021, 22, they didn't. So if you want to sell in tier 2, tier 3 markets, you need to get the word out, and you can't do that without really having advertising, sponsorship and so on in a country as big as
Right.
India. Coming to the point that they were already supply constrained and not demand constrained, again, the demand supply imbalance is a short term and a long term thing. marketing and advertising helps you build your long term demand. While they had short term demand, they had short term supply problems. I don't think they had a long term demand uh, or a long term demand supply imbalance problem. It was short on the demand side. So, which is why I think when they started putting money, really pouring money into marketing and advertising as such, I think they did the right thing, because otherwise you will always keep playing catch up uh, in terms of your production increasing and then you trying to increase demand. So you always need the demand to be slightly more than the production and have that forecast of demand, which people seem to miss out on. Like it's easy to go and say,
maybe we have bit of much of Tesla in our mind where they did everything without this kind of traditional advertisement, we can say.
so there's a different Tesla operated in very different
Correct.
markets. I was having this discussion with a friend recently, right? That Tesla never really poured money into advertising and they did everything themselves. You need to keep in mind a couple of things, right? Tesla is a global player. They sell really expensive cars, especially when the Model S and X were launched. They were very expensive cars for the markets they were in. They were trying to completely change the
No,
game, right? These
that's the
cars
same
were
point you said that the
very
company
different.
might
They
go
had
out of business, and what about that? That same point applied then at Tesla too, from Model S or X. And people still say
true,
it
but
will go bankrupt, but yeah.
correct. But the kind of people Tesla was targeting and the kind of people Ather needs to target, one, a world market, global markets versus India, and two, a car buyer, a premium car buyer
Scooter.
versus a
Right.
two-wheeler buyer. A two-wheeler scooter is not a high involvement product as a car. Somebody who's buying a car will do a lot more research, a lot more thought into buying it, and the buying decision is usually 3 to 6 months. A scooter buying decision in a country like India, which is a relatively low involvement product, is much smaller. So if you have a low involvement product uh, and you need to sell it, you need that stickiness of the brand name. People who are on the market for a BMW will cross shop it with a Tesla. Somebody who's going to buy a Honda Activa will not go and look at Ather or any other electric vehicle, because the general mentality is that electric vehicles are
Right.
not great. So those are very different things to keep in mind. I mean, drawing parallels to Tesla has always happened with
Yeah.
Ather, but I don't think that the product and the market is really comparable there.
So, coming on to your 450 ownership experience, I remember when you did the 5,000 kilometer thread. And so, how many
Yeah,
kilometers on it now?
not a lot, honestly. So I rode that vehicle to about 9,000 kilometers or so. And after that, COVID happened.
Yeah.
So really stopped riding it. And after 6 months or so, I moved to Delhi. In Delhi, I realized two wheelers were a bad idea. So I ended up buying a car because Delhi was hot, there was too much pollution, and I was traveling quite a lot more distance because I was traveling between Gurgaon and Delhi frequently. In a day, I would do 200 or so kilometers sometimes. So clearly, I was not going to do that on a two wheeler. So I never really rode it that much in Delhi. And then when I was planning to move to Europe, I ended up shipping it back to Indore, which is where my parents are from. And now they ride it. So I think in the last 2.5 years, they've ridden about 4,000 kilometers. It's at 13 or 14,000 meters now.
Basically new.
First 9,000 happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, they do actually. So they had a Suzuki Axis before that. And after the Axis, my dad ended up getting a Bajaj Avenger because he wanted to have that kind of a motorcycle once in his lifetime. He liked it, but it wasn't really practical for them. So when they got the Ather, he ended up selling his Avenger, and now they love it because they also don't ride more than 5-10 kilometers at a time. So range is never really a question or a problem. They love the practicality because they use it mostly to go and buy groceries and stuff. And sometimes, like smaller streets and all, it is much easier to take compared to taking a car. And riding it at slow speeds is really easy with the amazing balance it has. So they are having super fun with it.
Have they been able to convert any of their age group people to buy electric in their locality?
Oh yeah, we have quite a few Athers in my family now. Most of them are Gen 3 or late Gen 2 models, which people ended up buying. But it like there were a couple of people who rode my vehicle and they were like instantly, I need to get this because they'd never really seen the performance. And obviously the Gen 2 and Gen 3 were much faster. Um, so when I say Gen 2 and Gen 3, it basically means 450X, right? That was the internal name. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
The 450X is what I think most people have. Also, 450 was only sold in Bangalore and Chennai, I think. So nobody obviously got a chance to buy that. But we do have quite a lot of them now. Some people did buy the Ola and they regretted it. So uh, I don't have any affiliation to either of the brands, but that's just an anecdote that I heard.
I mean, yeah, they lacked quite a bit of service part and they are improving things, but let's see how it goes long term. They have done wonderful in, I would say, expansion and production part, which I wish Ather had done a bit more. So, owing to
Yeah.
your 450, any problems you have faced during these years, or your parents faced, I can say.
Um. So I think once the shroud got cracked, um the basic plastic part that is below the mirrors,
Okay.
because my mirrors got removed and put back multiple times. I shipped it once from Bangalore to Delhi, then Delhi to Indore. So I don't think that part was designed for multiple time mirror removal and reapplication. So it cracked. That was fixed under warranty.
Any powertrain
Um,
problems?
Beyond, not really. I think once my front disc got seized or maybe jammed, and my dad took it in for service. That happened like 2 months ago, I think, very recently. And he said he rode it in the rain quite a lot and maybe there was rust buildup or something, so they just unclogged it and it was fine. But fingers for crossed, nothing bad has happened.
So,
Luckily for
and
now.
you said that it's the 55th model win.
It's
Oh,
50.
win number.
Yeah, so it's the 55th production vehicle from the factory ever.
Yeah, so very early and still about new.
I mean, considering I was an employee, I was able to place an order before the pre-order started, and they started delivering to employees, I think, after selling maybe 70 or 80 vehicles in the market. So I was still in the first 100 or so when I got the scooter.
Yeah. We hope that that will become a prized possession for you, which will, increase in value over
I
generations.
really hope so. But I don't have any, honestly, I don't have any expectation of that happening.
All right. I think it's time for our
So,
next.
I mean, okay. So after Ether, you joined Bounce.
Yeah, Bounce, I had a very short stint in.
So what was that about?
Okay, so when I was nearing my end of time at Ather, as I said, like Ather, I was working on a few long-term projects. I wanted to kind of move out of the community thing because I had kind of set it up for 1.5 year, and it was getting a bit tiring for me personally. Like organizing the events and everything, it was quite a lot of work. So we ended up getting a new community manager so that I could focus on the long term projects as such. And yeah, I was on those long term projects, which one of which was kind of making sure that vehicle was built for the shared mobility environment that was eating up with Bounce and Bogo at that time. So yeah, I mean, I realized that by the time these projects kind of see the light of the day, uh, I don't know how many years would it be, and I wasn't really patient then. I was I came from a very, fast moving environment, and only my job felt like it was the long term vision sort of a job which most people didn't have. Like they were working on things that were relevant to the day. So I got an offer from Bounce where they wanted to expand internationally and their timeline was less than 6 months. So I said, hey, that looks interesting. So I ended up joining Bounce. and that was fun. I did work on their international expansion project. We were very close to going international, and
Um,
that was February
yeah.
2020, right around when COVID happened. So that got shared basically.
It's understandable, I think.
So yeah, that was my brief stint at Bounce. I think it was probably less than 8 months, 9 months, or something. I joined Bounce
Yeah.
3 months, 4 months later. COVID happened. I ended up coming to Europe multiple times during my time at Bounce to make sure that we had a good partner here to launch. We were able to acquire a company and so on. I mean, we
Hmm.
were not able to acquire. We were planning to acquire, but nothing really materialized. And Europe went into lockdown first. Then India went into lockdown. Entire business strategy and business model for Bounce changed. Yeah, there was not really anything for me to do there after that. So yeah, I ended up leaving.
So yeah, I mean, you've seen the growth of Ather from becoming like a fast moving company to this big giant wherein things are still moving slow on certain ends. And then you move to Bounce where you wanted to do something again, like to be in that fast-paced environment. So, and because of COVID, you couldn't do that. So then what was your next assignment? I'm assuming that again was in an EV space.
Yeah. So um, after Bounce, I was started looking around, to find something because there was so much uncertainty in the world at that time. This was mid 2020. I was still living in Bangalore, and I was trying to look for something interesting at the same time, worthwhile to do. And I got connected to this really tiny company. It was literally three people when I joined. So it was a subsidiary of a subsidiary of Petronas, and it was a very small company who was doing last mile deliveries for companies like Amazon, Big Basket, Flipkart, and so on,
Hmm.
which they were doing in Delhi at that time. So I spoke with them. They wanted somebody who had experience with electric vehicles, with charging infrastructure, and also to some level with business development and pricing. So I spoke to them. I liked what they were doing. They liked what I had to bring to the table, and I ended up moving there to Delhi.
Correct.
It was a company in Gurgaon, basically, and it was quite a lot of fun. I mean, I wouldn't want to go back and do that because it was really taxing. But I think I learned way too much during a very short span of time by working there. So effectively, what we were doing was, so when you
Yeah.
get parcels delivered from Amazon, most of the time people who are delivering are not Amazon hired people. They're partners of Amazon who are paid on a per parcel basis. Now, these partners could be individual partners, or it could be companies like, for example, Shadowfax, who has some partners, and then Shadowfax gets paid by Amazon, and those people get paid by Shadowfax. So we had a similar business model. The end goal for that company was to go into fleet leasing, and but the initial thing was that we wanted to understand how the electric vehicles work, which were the best ones in the market, how much effort was it, what was the cost it was going to be, how much could we price it at, and so on. So we were really trying to do the business first to understand how the ropes of the business were. Uh, when I joined there, they had about 20 vehicles, and we kept buying and buying. And by the time I left, 1.5 year later, we had about 400 vehicles or so, 300 maybe, yeah, across Delhi, Pune, and Hyderabad. So we had expanded. Um, and then we were doing those deliveries, but we also started leasing those vehicles out to other uh, companies. So these guys are called DSPs, delivery service providers, delivery service partners. So yeah, I- so yeah, basically my job was to make sure that the vehicle charging hubs were set up properly with the electric infrastructure for charging these vehicles. Make sure that the routes that we had planned were within the driving range of these vehicles. We had shifts between, like, the each vehicle would do at least shifts and sometimes three. So
Hmm.
two shifts, between the two shifts we had enough of a buffer to charge the vehicles up so that they could go on to the next shift and so on. So that was effectively my job, to make sure that the fleet was running perfectly.
Back in September 2020, like when you joined, what kind
Yeah.
of three-wheeler electric delivery vehicles were present? Like, were you buying of same brands, different brands? Were you buying someone which had like a removable battery or a fixed battery, like or proprietary charging points or regular charging points? If you can just talk to us about that.
Yeah, so I think the commercial market was very different from the uh, B2C market at that time. I mean, the time I joined, the vehicles were very, very bad. I will not name the name of the brand, although
Yeah.
I think it's already shut down by now. But it was kind of a Chinese import, and they were doing some assembly in India and then selling those vehicles. The key was that we wanted to buy as many brands as possible so that we
Hmm.
could test and assess which brands we would go in with big. So, for example, we were working with a company called MLR Auto. There was E-Trio. There was Mahindra, of course, Piaggio. There's one, two more companies that I'm forgetting the names now. So
Hmm.
our key was like, let's buy 10 vehicles from everyone. And
Correct.
obviously, 10 vehicles is a relatively big enough order that you can understand what is the capability of really producing those vehicles. You could
Yeah.
also understand consistency between the products. Like, is there very high inconsistency between two or three vehicles, or that's something you can't understand by just having one or two units of each. You could also do a realistic range assessment. You could also do a good charging experience assessment and so on. So we ended up buying quite a few of these products. We went big with Mahindra commercial vehicles and Piaggio, which we
Hmm.
ended up buying, I think, 50 each or 100 each of, something like that.
Hmm.
Um, and in terms of batteries being removable or non-removable, we mostly got vehicles with fixed batteries. There were some which had removable batteries, but it was very difficult to remove and change them because these batteries weighed like 40 kgs each. So you
Yeah.
need to have two people who would remove it and put it back. So it's not really a swap necessarily, right? Because you can't store these batteries anywhere. The vehicle has to come back to the hub. And then these
Correct.
batteries were expensive. So mostly what we ended up doing was buying vehicles with fixed batteries because uh, I don't know if you guys know about the classification. I think there are two classifications. One is L3 and one is L5N. So we were trying to mostly buy L5 category vehicles, not L3, because L3 vehicles were prohibited from a lot of types of roads, especially around Delhi, because they were really slow speed. So with the L5 vehicles, the battery capacity was anywhere between 8 to 12 kilowatt hours. And 8 to 12 kilowatt hour batteries, you can't really do swap. It
Yeah.
is not feasible.
I mean, it has to be automatic with that size battery, not human.
Yeah, but then that's the problem, right? Like automatic battery swap needs way too much standardization, way too much infrastructure. I mean,
Yeah.
you're talking about
Yeah,
hubs with 5 to 10 vehicles each spread across Delhi NCR region, and delivering with the small supervisor and so on. So it's not, again, I mean, I think it can be done maybe for trucks or buses when you have that kind of infrastructure, but not really for uh, light commercial vehicles.
So in these three-wheeler electric vehicles, right?
Yeah.
Would you have to set up your own charging infrastructure, or would the manufacturer help you with that? Like, how was it? Because none of us really here have owned a three-wheeler. We have spoken a lot about two-wheelers and the four-wheelers, right? So how does it work in the three-wheeler market?
So, no, like from a manufacturer standpoint, I don't think any manufacturer at that point was helping set it up. We were basically given like 2 or 3 kilowatt portable DC chargers, which were terrible, by the way. They were not really chargers, those were DC power supply units from those old cell phone towers, right? So, the units that go into cell phone towers, they were
Yeah.
what we were being given. It did not look like it was meant to be a portable charger because it was like something that you would mount internally in a house or in a building. So it was not designed as a product. It was just, let's say, it was just a jugaad at that time that they were selling with the product. Again, won't name names who was the manufacturer of those chargers, but it was
No,
terrible.
that's fine. Yeah.
They were not weather rated. With dust, they would, die. With water, they would die. And these vehicles were being like set up in remote areas with really terrible roads. So you can't mount the charger on the vehicle because of the vibration. It would,
Yeah.
stop working. So way too many problems with those chargers. They were all off board, of course. Um,
Hmm.
and we would mostly install like 15 ampere industrial plugs, so
Hmm.
at locations. And with the 15 ampere industrial plug, you can basically load 3 kilowatt on a vehicle. That is what the vehicles were capable of charging with anyway. And mostly most chargers were either 2 or 3 kilowatt. So that was what we were doing, but terrible solutions, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean this is like a time capsule episode for us wherein we are trying to see how the industry was back then. Because recently we have Exponent Energy who's claiming to
Yeah,
charge their three-wheeler batteries like from in
yeah,
15 minutes. So it's a really a long way the industry has come from the past. Um, so with this, let's step into something which is more closer. And we understand that you were involved in setting up a Tesla service, or Tesla rental service, or right? So, and that too, this is not in the Indian markets, but this is in the American market, like the North and South American market. So, uh, how has that experience been? And like, what do you see? Like, there are multiple threads that we can go into, but why don't you start off with that?
yeah. So the origin of that was I was still in India back then, and the thing was I wanted to move to Europe, and with Bounce, it could have materialized. If COVID would have not happened, I would have moved to Europe with Bounce. But since that did not happen, this company that I worked for, Amplis, in Delhi, was for me a stopgap solution until I could kind of find my way here. So basically, when I started looking for jobs, I found this company called Beat. They were basically a ride-hailing company, just like any other Uber, Lyft, and Ola, and so on. Nothing really unique about them. But one thing that was unique was that they had a private fleet of Tesla cars in Mexico. Sorry, not in the US. In Mexico, that they were operating, and this was completely owned and operated by them. So the drivers were hired, not ride hailing gig workers. They had their own vehicles, which were again purchased, and they had their own charging infrastructure that they had set up. So that was what they were doing already before I joined. I interviewed with them for basically a marketplace manager role, which effectively means that a marketplace manager is the person who manages the uh, demand and supply balance of the marketplace. So if the demand goes down, you need to be able to scale down your supply or scale up your demand, and vice versa, right? So that's what my job role was. Um, and they hired me exclusively for this electric vehicle fleet they had in Mexico. So I think it was 150 or 170 cars at that time when I joined. But the problem statement was that they had those cars on the road quite a long time, but they were not able to make a lot of revenue. And there were quite a lot of problems in terms of pricing, in terms of not being able to extract the value out of the vehicle really, running the vehicle in really bad times when there is no demand and so on. So I worked on fixing a lot of those problems for them. So wasn't really so much of a electric vehicle experience, but considering I had a background in the electric vehicle space, there were quite a lot of innovations that we were able to do. So, for example, in typical ride hailing companies, what happens is the price that a customer pays is linked to the distance that is driven uh, primarily, and very limited. I mean, the weightage of the time component is very low, and the weightage of the distance component is really high. But when it comes to electric vehicles in a private fleet, your time is money effectively. So you don't necessarily need to charge the customer on the distance driven, because your cost of running that is very low. The cost of fuel is very low, but your time cost is very high because you're paying the driver based on the number of hours. You only have 24 hours to extract as much revenue as possible from that car. So what we did was we started charging customers based on the duration of the ride and not based on the distance of the ride, and that ended up creating a great revenue stream for the company, because all the customers who wanted to take longer rides, higher distance but less time, were willing to pay, because then we were not charging them based on the distance they were driving. And that really kind of solved those problems. I mean, our revenue per day per car went up from about 40 euros to 110 euros, which was almost like a 3x increase in a span of 8 months. And during that time, we also launched the same service, but instead of Teslas, we used a couple of other brands, mostly from China, SAIC and BYD and Citroen DS, actually, in Chile and Colombia, and also another fleet in Mexico that we added.
Wow. So, I mean, it is like what we're seeing here is that just because the technology of the car has changed, you can literally change business models around that. Just curious to understand, right? Because we have a similar company in India called Blue Smart, right? They
Yeah.
have they are owning the stack almost all of it vertically. So, at what point does can a company start seeing that? Okay, like initially we all know that Blue Smart or Beat here, right? They must have made significant investments in procuring the car and developing their own charging infrastructure and everything, right? So what is the turning point wherein the prices start to drop drastically, and more and more, that is when your demand really goes up immensely, right? So is there a certain time wherein the prices are kept high and then it goes low, or the companies, like, how does that work? If you can just enlighten us on that.
I think it's the biggest problem that is there in ride hailing is the demand supply imbalance. And I think I will use that phrase quite a lot, because that's effectively what you need to solve for. So imagine a time when it is, let's say, 5 p.m., when everybody wants to leave office at the same time. You will keep, like, especially if you have lived in a big city like Bangalore, you will keep trying to book an Uber or a Ola, and it will not give you a car, which basically means that the demand is way higher than the supply is, which means there is opportunity to increase price. And that is why dynamic pricing and search fees and all that happens, right? Because people, if you increase the price high enough, there will be a lot of people who will not be willing to pay that, which means your demand will reduce because you have a fixed supply. uh, and so that's effectively what you need to solve for. Now, if you have a model where you are charging a fixed fee, you will never be able to meet the demand during that time, and customers will have a terrible experience because they are never able to find a ride. On the contrary, when you have very low demand, you want to reduce the price as much as possible, because you have already sunk the cost, right? You have already invested in putting the car on the road. You have already invested in paying the driver a salary to be on the road. You've already paid all the insurance, tax, and whatever. So if your car is on the road, you want to get some money out of it, even if it is not enough to kind of offset your fixed cost, because your fixed cost is a sunk cost. So as long as you're operationally charging more than what your uh, operating costs are, then you're good. So that is what I think is the key with these kind of operating models. But also something that is really important to do is to plan your charging very well, because this was a problem with us, right? uh, because we had, I think, let's say, on average 10 fast chargers, and that is it. So if, let's say, you have 100 cars and 10 fast chargers, in 10 hours, if you need to charge the car, every hour 10 of the cars will be charging, and 90 of the cars will be on the road. But you can never have 100 cars on the road, because you can't afford to lose an hour to charge the cars. Now I'm still talking about way higher number of charges than we actually had, but the
Correct.
problem
No,
is,
yeah.
during your peak hours, you can't afford to not have all the cars on the road, because you need to be able to charge during that time, which means that you can never perfectly match your charging capacity with the running capacity or the cars on the road, you only always need to have 30 to 40% extra charging capacity, so that you can charge enough that during your peak hours, both in the day, in the morning and in the evening, especially during peak rush hours, you have cars on the road. And also on Saturday evenings when people are out partying and drinking and they need to go back. So to be able to do that, you always need to have extra buffer capacity, and that is what I think needs to be solved for, which people sometimes don't realize, that having a car sit and charge for 2 hours during that time is the most detrimental to your business. There were times where we were charging 6 times higher for the car, for a ride in the peak hour compared to a off peak hour. Now imagine, if you can make 6 times more money in a certain hour, a
Yeah,
car sitting in your charging infrastructure getting charged is way worse than installing extra chargers so that you can have every single car out on the road during that time.
correct. And I think what we are seeing here, like this is from my experience, that what I'm seeing when I'm using Blue Smart, right? So I travel to Delhi often. I'm primarily based out of Bombay. And when I'm seeing in Delhi is that most, despite me being a Blue Smart Prime member, which is like a premium offering that they have, the point is that all the time, like I see that the cab slots are just booked. That just means that they have enough demand, like for them to like the number of cars that they have, like the supply and demand is, like they have less supply and more demand is basically what I'm trying to say. So in that case, maybe like, I mean, it is interesting to find out if they're charging more cars back then, like during say Monday morning, right? If I want to book a cab from wherever in Delhi to Gurgaon. So, and if I don't get a cab, that just means that probably they have all the cars are out on the road or someone charging. And if they're charging, then it's not really good for business, I guess.
Yeah, and that is also another. I mean, while that is bad for business, I think pricing is also an issue there, right? Because you're pricing it well enough that there are so many people who are willing to pay that price for the ride, but you just don't have those many cars. So you need to be able to increase the price enough that you reduce the demand, which matches your supply,
Correct.
and that's you need to solve for when it comes to ride hailing. Because in a lot of other industries, right, when you're even buying a car, for example, sometimes there are bookings, and then bookings can be 2 months, sometimes some bookings can be 6 months. But ride hailing demand has a very short shelf life. If you need to travel now, you can't wait and travel 2 hours later when you'll find a cab. If you don't get a
Exactly.
cab smart, you will take a Ola or Uber, and that is why
Yeah.
your shelf life evaporates like faster than dry ice, because it will not sit around for you to bring a car there, which is why you need to be able to match your demand level to your supply level, and that's what I think is the key in ride hailing or Swiggy or like any other delivery sort of business, which is the network based business.
I think it will be really interesting to see Blue Smart walk away from their surge pricing, because they have always marketed themselves as a no surge company. So, in order to optimize for their supply and demand and pricing, right? So, if and when that happens, it will be very interesting to see.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great story to sell, I would say. I mean, nothing against Blue Smart. I love their service. I've used it quite a lot when I was in Delhi, and I mean, I think they're doing one of the best things out there. But I don't think this is a long-term strategy that will stick. I personally think that at some point they will flip the switch and said, you know what, we can't do this. We need to have surge pricing or uh, you know dynamic pricing. It's just not going to last.
Sresh, you have provided really great insight into the business side of ride hailing, and there are multiple companies that are in India right now. Priyans has listed them. It would be interesting to have this market develop. Ola and Uber are also going electric. Uber already has bought some Tigor EVs. Okay.
Mhm.
Moving on to next, you are right now in Europe,
Yeah, I'm in the Netherlands.
right? So you told us that you bought a Tesla Model 3. Can you tell a bit about us? Which version is that?
Yeah, so I bought the basic standard range white with black interiors, whichever is the cheapest version. That's the one I got.
Okay, so it's LFP model. Great.
Yeah, it's the LFP.
Yeah. So how much have you driven it till now?
I have driven it, I think, 23,000 kilometers by now.
23.
23,000, yeah.
Okay, wow, that's a lot.
And when did you buy it?
I bought it in January, so it's been 7 months to the
Wow,
date.
that's
That's a lot of.
The price
That's a lot of.
is
I mean,
so
you texted back in May that you have done 12K kilometer in 4 months. Uh,
yeah,
you
and
have
it's almost
basically, yeah,
I almost
it
like
must
drive 6,000 to 3,500 kilometers a month.
it must be the European summer effect, Nikhil. Like
maybe, maybe. I mean, so how's driving there in Europe, basically from electric vehicle point of view?
So it's very very easy. I think I can imagine 100% of the vehicles, especially in Western Europe, being electric now, considering the density of charging infrastructure that is here, plus the rules and everything that are pro EV so much. I mean, there has never been really a problem for me to even think about it from a standpoint that, hey, I'm driving an EV. It's just like any other car here anymore. I mean, I'm sitting outside right now and I can see one Renault Zoe, one Polestar parked near me, one more Kia e-Niro. So there's just like, I think every second or third car here is an electric one now. It's just very convenient.
I'm assuming you live in some apartment.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, so is there charging? Is there parking garage or is there street charging? How do you charge
Uh,
your daily?
yeah, I mean there are two or three street chargers right around my apartment, which is like a 10-meter walk from there, honestly. But I don't usually charge there because I have free charging at work. So I mostly charge at the office. But nowadays, when I need to charge at outside the office, I mostly do supercharging because supercharging is extremely cheap here now. When I bought the car, average supercharging rates were like half a euro for a kilowatt hour. Now it's half of that. It's 24 cents per kilowatt hour. So the street charging is about 35 cents. So it just doesn't make sense to do street charging anymore.
I mean, in recent
wow.
month, Tesla in Europe has decreased the prices a lot. Recently, they did
They
a
did it twice already. So once they reduced it like from 45, sorry, 50 to 35, and then from 35 to 24 now.
I mean, there was some decrease a week or ago, something like that also. Maybe not in
Yeah,
our
yeah, yeah.
market. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
So 15th they prices again, 15th August.
so, so you have done quite a lot of long trip, we assume. And how's the DC public charging network? How's the supercharger expectation? And have you ever faced any problem? And compare that to the third party DC charger of the Europe.
Yeah, so I actually did that, right? So I did quite a few road trips. I mostly have gone to Belgium because we also have another office in Belgium. So I've gone there a couple of times, which is about 250 kilometers. So I do need to charge at least once, either on my way or coming back. Uh, so that's something that I've done quite often. I've driven to Paris once, which was about 550 kilometers. So I've used the supercharger network over there as well. Superchargers are, I mean, like next level amazing. I knew about them. I had seen videos and done everything, but like the moment you plug in, it starts charging. There is no authentication. There is nothing. I've never faced a supercharger which didn't work, or I had to plug out or plug it back in, or nothing like that. And it is so quick that by the time you go to a restroom and maybe grab something to eat and come back, you already have enough charge to be able to go to either your destination or to the next charger, which is what I usually do. So supercharger network is amazing by far. But when I was in Italy last week, so I drove about 4,000 kilometers in a span of 2 weeks. I drove from Netherlands to Italy, which was about 1,200 kilometers in a day. And while I was in Italy, the chargers are not as dense as they are in Netherlands and Belgium and Germany and France. So there were times where I was staying like in really remote areas and driving quite a lot locally. So I had to find one of the local chargers, which was from a company called B Charge, and I had to charge with them. So it was quite okay, I think. I mean, street charging worked just like it works in Europe, sorry, in Netherlands. But DC fast charging is the first time I tried it on a different charger, and it was okay. I mean, the authentication obviously wasn't there. I had to do it with the app, but it worked just as good. The only difference was that it wasn't a Tesla supercharger.
Right. No,
Wow, just for
Gar-
context, Shreyas, like I have an MG ZS EV and I have driven like 30,000 kilometers in a year. And like, if I understand correctly, right, till the time you went to Italy, you did not have to look at any other charging network other than the Tesla superchargers.
Yeah.
And the situation in India is such that I have like 50 apps on my phone, and every time I have to authenticate each charging session or wherever the charger, and it's just crazy. Like, I mean, the difference in the scale of infrastructure that is there in India and that is there in Europe is completely different. Like, just wanted to point that out.
Oh, that is true. And I mean, that was one of the biggest reasons that I bought a Tesla and not any other EV, uh, because of the charging infrastructure network. I mean, there is quite a lot of chargers here which all generally work. I mean, there is a really good network called Fastnet, then there is Shell Recharge, which you can find on highways everywhere, and they work great. But I mean, they're expensive. Uh, Shell on average, I think, is about 75 cents per kilowatt hour for fast charging. That's almost equivalent to using petrol. So why would people buy the biggest advantage that is touted is that your running cost is low, and if you're going on a road trip paying as much as you would do to fill up your gas tank, then there is no real merit of having that electric car and then spending maybe 15 to 20 minutes charging it. So cost wise there is a big difference between Tesla and others. uh, of course, Tesla has their own network and they can do a lot more with that. But other thing was, I mean, in Italy also, I charged at the other network is because Tesla's price was really high in Italy. It was 45 cents. The other network was 38. So I tried to avoid Tesla, but I could have just lived with it if I wanted to. I mean, if you feel that you need to drive more, then instead of plugging out at 50%, you can let it go to 95% and then plug out, which I never did. I never charged at a fast charger more than 60%. So I could have just lived with Tesla as well in Italy, but it was more expensive. So I said, I'll just charge at a cheaper one.
so you recently visited a V4 supercharger. How was that different from the V3?
It wasn't really very different, to be honest. I mean, the cable is longer, um, and the charger stall itself is bigger, but that's it. I imagine there is some internal hardware difference with which it probably can support more. But like the problem that I see now is that because Tesla has opened up the supercharger network to other vehicles, sometimes some vehicles come and park at a supercharger, and because their charge ports are located in random other places, they end up taking two spaces instead of one. And that I've seen mostly with Volkswagen ID4 vehicles because of their charge.
Yeah.
But like for example, Polestar and Tesla has it at the same location, so they don't take up two, right? But the V4 will solve that problem because the cable is much longer, so you don't need to hog up two spaces to be able to charge. And I'm guessing once,
That's why they rolled out V4 first in Europe instead of America.
yeah, because also the connector standard, right? In the
Yeah.
US, they need to have a magic dock so that they can convert Tesla to CCS1. Here, they already have CCS2,
Right.
so anything can charge.
So, among your road trips, have you ever had to plan, or you just input it in your Tesla and it plans the whole route and charges and all?
It does that on its own. I never have to plan, but sometimes I don't stick to that plan because of cost mostly. Like if I'm going to France, for example, I try to skip Belgium altogether because Belgium charging costs are almost twice compared to Netherlands and France. So I don't want to spend that money. Why should I? So I would just rather spend 10 minutes extra and charge a bit more so that I can skip the next charger and go to the one in France. That's something I do mostly, but otherwise, if I don't have that cost differentiation, I will never bother about it and just follow what the car says.
I think
Here is one surprise.
Prians would love that to happen here.
Yeah, here is a surprising fact, right? When you were mentioning the cost, right? Um, the Indian fast charging network is like they also cost around 29-30 rupees a unit, including GST. So that's almost the same price of electricity that you are paying there as compared
Yeah,
to what is here. So I mean that is pretty surprising for me. But yeah, that is what it is.
You know,
So yeah.
we have 25 kilowatt charger and Tesla's 250. That's the hardware differentiation need to be included.
yeah. I think from a charging speed point of view, of course, this is much faster. And my car actually can only take 170, not even 250. But it's still so fast because with the LFP, I think the charging curve is better and it stays at a higher charge rate much longer than the NMC batteries do.
Yeah.
So the NMC is like at beyond 200, it stays for a very short time and then it drops anyway. So if you compare the rate of charging, it's probably identical. And even at 90%, this car pulls about 35 kilowatt, which is half more than half C. So almost all the way up, you really don't feel that. I mean, in 35 minutes, it charges to 100%, which is, I mean, mind blowing to me. Still, every time I go to a supercharger, I'm quite impressed.
So how's the AC charging infrastructure around malls and offices? And
AC or
if you
AC?
have been recently to India, what would you like to be done here? And if you have seen any improvement here?
AC in terms of AC charging. Yeah.
Yeah, so in AC, so in terms of AC charging here, right? I think almost all park garages have some AC chargers. Mostly they are either 11 kilowatt or 22 kilowatt three phase chargers, and they're reserved for electric vehicles. I have not seen people, just randomly parking their cars and not using it. You'll either find them being empty or they being used by electric vehicles to charge. So people are generally nice about it, I would say. But I think one big difference that I've seen here versus what I've heard about in India as well as the US is that here none of those chargers have cables. So you always carry your own cable which has both the male and female plug, and then you plug one into the charger and one into your car. That's just the norm here in Europe. I think that's not necessarily true in India, right? So you have the cable attached to the charger,
Europe has untethered
which
charger for street charging majority.
Yeah,
not
in India, except for granny charging, like everywhere else you get the cable. So
Yeah, so I think it's better here because what that does is that it allows the charger's life to be better, right? If there is a cable attached to it, people abuse it a lot more, and then you have failures, you have faults, and then downtime and so on. But if you don't have a cable, then your reliability goes up significantly. And because the people own their own cables, they obviously treat it much better than they would treat a public cable. Of course, that's not true for DC because you can't carry around a DC cable. But AC, I don't think I've seen even one charger with a tethered cable on it.
I mean, in Europe, I think manufacturers provide that cable with the vehicle. Most of them, I think.
Yes, so that's true, but it's not like so. There are two types of AC charging that you can do. One is the granny charger, which is
Right.
just a wall outlet, and the other one is a type 2 to type 2 male female plug, right? Uh, Most manufacturers here don't supply the granny charger. It's mostly the type 2 to
Okay.
type 2. So you have to buy the granny charger separately. But surprisingly, with my car, I actually got both, which was a bit something that I was not expecting. And I had already bought a granny charger from outside from China. So now I have two. one that came with the car and one separately.
Okay.
So, I think we have covered most of the points for Tesla. Nikhil, do you have any other Tesla questions? Otherwise, we can go back to one question from the previous topic.
Yeah, I mean, how would you see Tesla operating in India? How would it perform according to your expectation and driving experience? How would it be here?
I think so. I have the Model 3, right? From a Model 3 and Model S point of view, I think the biggest challenge will be the ground clearance, because while I have not fortunately hit my vehicle from the bottom anywhere yet, there are sometimes really steep, curbs or something which you need to climb, and if you go too fast, it is possible that you would hit it. I can imagine totally that in India it would happen quite a lot. I in fact have a friend who used to work in Tesla India, who had the Model 3 for a couple of days, and he said in Bangalore almost every drive he went to, the vehicle hit the bottom. So that would be the biggest problem. And the other thing would be probably the tires, because the tires here in like Tesla, the wheels protrude out a lot more because of some aerodynamic reasons. Versus in India, for example, the tires are slightly oversized compared to the wheel. So because of that, I think the tires' life would be impacted quite a lot, especially in the potholes. I don't think these are designed to handle that kind of a terrain. So that those will be some problems that they'll have to address. Model Y should be okay. I think it has slightly more ground clearance, but in terms of everything else, right? Drivability, in terms of the performance, temperature management, all that will be amazing. It's of course, like, I don't think autopilot and those features would work at all because we don't have proper signage and markings, but otherwise I
Maybe on highways. Yeah.
but not really. So I'll tell you why I don't think it's advisable to ever use it on the highway in India, because what happens is sometimes you don't have lane markings, or sometimes the lane markings are such that they could lead you into outside the road,
Increasing.
because it's missing or it's overpainted or whatever, and the car does not do navigation. Sorry, it does not do autopilot based on the navigation. It does it based on the street markings, the lane markings, right? And if your lane marking, sometimes it happens here as well, that there is a temporary lane marking which has kind of been done on top of the existing one, and you're supposed to steer the car to the new one. The car doesn't recognize it, and it has led to a few close calls for me. So whenever I see there is construction going on and then there are temporary lanes that are designed, I always take over. But in India, I can imagine that being a recipe for disaster.
It would be interesting how that goes. Yeah.
and
So
and, and
Priyan's,
here as well, right? Like the
think
Netherlands has really good infrastructure, so that doesn't happen so much. But in Italy and Switzerland, especially in the mountain areas, there is a lot of road work that happens. And once there is road work happening, you can't leave the car on autopilot at all. There's just not a option.
All right.
okay,
Uh,
cool.
So we have one question from the last point that we were discussing about battery swapping. So, Hero being a common investor in both Ather and Gogoro, sorry.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts slash opinions on battery swapping for two-wheelers versus the fixed batteries that you get in, say, like an Ather or an Ola? And how do you think, like, in terms of both, like, where what will work better in terms of the Indian market? What are your thoughts on that? If you can just quickly tell us.
So, in principle, I think I am completely opposed to battery swapping. There are a lot of problems that are there with battery swapping around the ownership, around the management, around the subscription, and all that. And you can almost do away with most of it. You don't really need to swap batteries unless there is a use case which is like somebody who's using it for Swiggy, or using it for Amazon deliveries or such. That is where I can imagine it might work, but I would again bet my money on fast charging, because you don't need to charge from 0 to 100 all the time, right? You can charge from 10% to 50% and be on your way, and that you can achieve in 10 minutes. And Exponent is already kind of showing that with three wheelers. I mean, if they can do it with three wheelers, it can definitely be done with two wheelers as well. So I strongly think that battery swapping will create a lot of problems in the you know in the whole ecosystem that it will not really solve for. For example, standardization becomes a problem. uh,
Correct. Yeah.
Standardization is something that you can't really have for batteries. I mean, batteries are the lifeblood of the vehicle, and the moment you try to standardize it, you will never have that kind of a vehicle that you can have with a fixed battery sealed in. So I really don't believe in it, to be honest.
The advantage of the vehicle, the OEM goes away like completely, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you're designing your vehicle and you need to use a standard battery, there's only so much you can do.
Correct. Correct.
I have the same view as you with regard to swapping, that it's not for everyone. Maybe some rare cases for fleet deliveries. Maybe.
Yeah.
All right. Nikhil, any other points, or else we can close the podcast?
No, I think it has been very interesting to talk to Shreyas and talk about the wide variety of the topics that we have included.
So,
So
yeah,
thank you, Shreyas.
thank you, Shreyas, for your time. And you can follow Shreyas on Twitter. Shreyas, your Twitter handle is
It's Shreyas underscore EVs.
okay. And you can follow Tesla Club India on Twitter, and you can follow me on Twitter on at exp with EVs. Thank you for this episode, and we will see you on the next one.
Thanks, guys. Have a good one.
Thank you.